Okay, Ben, do you want to give us a quick intro to you?
Sure. Great to be here. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ben. I co-founded Memrise 13 years ago. My longer term background is in studying neuroscience, experimental psychology. I got very into, I'm going to contend, I'll try and keep this relatively short. I got very into neural networks as a teenager. I was trying to predict horse races. It never quite worked out. But that led me to go and study neuroscience at Oxford, where I got fascinated by the way that humans form memories and the way that we learn. And particularly the way we learn languages. I got into that because I was rubbish at learning languages. And I was kind of intrigued that it's almost a defining feature of a human brain that it learns languages. And it was quite disappointing to discover that mine didn't. And I came up with a general idea that this was because it was because of the way I was being taught them. Language learning is actually mainly about practice. Most things in human cognition, it's about practicing things. Your brain just forgets things if they aren't rehearsed. And so then when I graduated, I moved to China to try and see if I could learn Chinese if I wasn't being taught it. I spent a while there. It turned out I could learn Chinese. I set up my first companies there. And I got very into a kind of startup community there because I had grown up in quite a traditional English background. My schooling and university probably meant that I should become a banker. That's what everyone else did. And no one around me was doing startups. And whereas China in the early 2000s was where every kind of chancer, wannabe fortune hunter was in their early 20s was going. It was a kind of fun place to be. It was a great crowd of people. And it was where I was really introduced to people from Silicon Valley who were out there building startups and thinking in that kind of a way. In fact, the guy that I did my main business out there was motorcycle business. I had a motorcycle factory. The main guy I did that with, who was exporting them, runs another import-export freight forwarding company called Flexport he's now raised on a valuation of sort of 10, 12 billion or something. But there were a lot of people around there at that time doing, getting into startup world. So that was my route into it. And then set up Memrise 13 years ago. And the last 5 years been doing more and more angel investing and sort of helping other people with their early stage startups. And I'll stop there. Actually, I could ramble on for hours. So there's my intro.
Headline wise with Memrise, can you just talk about, so you started the business 12, 13 years ago. How did the fundraising journey go and what size is the team now? You at with
fundraising journey. So we started off with this vision to build this platform for helping people acquire a language, largely through practice rather than doing traditional courses. We grew pretty slowly for the first couple of years. It was kind of banging our head against a brick wall, not making much progress. We actually had a thesis when we founded the company that we should start on mobile because that was a new platform and was going to grow fast. Our technical co-founder couldn't build mobile apps, so we didn't. So we spent 2 years not building a mobile app and not really growing. Then we raised a seed round after Techstars. We went to the US to do Techstars and to raise money because we believed that we needed to offer a free product in order to build a substantial user base, because we thought it was a network effect business and that ultimately people weren't going to pay up front for a language learning app, and it needed to be a freemium model, and that UK VCs weren't going to fund us to do that. We were certainly right about that, so we went to the US and got funded there. We had grown pretty slowly by the point of our Series A. Really, we didn't have the metrics to get a Series A. So my co-founder Ed went out to San Francisco. We tried to raise money off every VC we knew. We by this time working from England, and we were struggling to raise it. We had no revenue. we had reasonable engagement numbers, and we were growing user numbers about 2x year on year. But against the context of the growth in mobile apps, like 2x growth year on year in user numbers was nothing, or it wasn't enough. So Ed went out to San Francisco to try and raise off the guy that we eventually invested in us. And he did the first pitch. He'd flown out to San Francisco to pitch to him, and he started giving the pitch. And about 3 minutes in, the guy was just like, Ed, man, I'm bored. It's just a boring company you're selling me, and I just don't care. Tell you what you should do. Go away, spend the evening, just like think about this a bit more, come back tomorrow, tell me a different story. So Ed went home, got on the phone to me. We had a bit of a conversation. We're like, shit, we've got to tell a better story. And we then just told a slightly more grandiose story about the network we were building. We pulled out the bits of evidence from what we'd already done that supported our story of the fact that we were building a really powerful network. And we told him that story the next day, and then he invested. And it was a very un-European approach to investment. It was very much big picture investment. He was like, yeah, I like the story. I didn't like the story you told yesterday. I like the story you're telling today. Yeah, sure, I'll give you the money. So we did that. We raised 4 million on a Series A. That's like 2013. We then built that up. We at that point used that money to build a mobile app, and we got onto mobile just about early enough. We were much later than we should have been. Duolingo had been on mobile for 2 years by the time we made a mobile app, and that was a big mistake. I think Duolingo were the first with a decent mobile app by about 2.5 years, and really everyone else has been playing catch up ever since. Though when we launched our mobile apps, our thesis was, as it remains, no other language learning app is actually. So shall I answer these in flight?
No, we'll go back to the questions at the end. So we'll go through a few questions first, and then we'll facilitate chat. So
it's a fair question. So how do you go to San Francisco? So because we've been on Techstars, this guy who'd led our Series A we had met a bunch of US investors. He had invested in our seed round. So we knew he was a warm lead. This wasn't a cold thing. So we went to San Francisco by going on a Techstars program in the US, ultimately, to build that network. And yeah, lucky the investor was willing to see you again. I guess this is a general point that I think we did really well, was that we wasted very little time on investors who weren't just sold on what we were trying to do. And we got a lot of no's, and we got a lot of people who thought we should be charging up front for our product. We got a lot of people who just had a different vision on what we were trying to build. And I actually can't take credit for this. This was definitely Ed, my co-founder, was very strong on just being like, shutting down the meeting if it wasn't working. It was just like, looks like you guys don't have the vision for us. We're off. And sifting for the investors who really did see it and doubling down on those, spending more time with those, looking for other people who were similar to those. And so, yeah, we were a bit lucky that the investor was willing to see us, but that was also because it was self-selecting. We had found the investor with whom we resonated, and then we also were telling a story that we kind of knew would resonate. And actually, I tell that anecdote like we just went and wrote a different story. In a way, we had made the story appeal more to a European audience because we've been pitching to investors in London. And really what Rich was telling us when Ed went out for that meeting was, you have made this story uninteresting to me. I know that there's an interesting story in there, but you have started to think small and started to put the blinkers on and be less transformational than you were when you were based in the US a year ago. So please open up your imaginations. And this has really changed. I don't mean to knock the London startup scene. The London startup scene in 2010 was very, very different to where it is now. And I think that things like Hotbed are really changing that and giving you a place to be able to do this without having to go over to the US. But back in 2010, the level of ambition and the level of experience from the UK startup scene was a very, very different place to where it is now.
There's some questions coming in around like how you chip. It would be good to hear your interesting story of how you pitched Memrise versus the boring story, if you can do it in like a minute of like just like explaining kind of what the difference is so people hear.
So let me try. I mean, this is more than 10 years ago. No, it is 10 years ago, this pitch. So it's a decent time ago. But roughly, we were pitching on user numbers and growth in user numbers and engagement metrics. We didn't have revenue numbers. And Rich's point was, if you're just telling me like free user numbers and engagement, but no money, I can't see that you're building value. So I don't care. And but in the UK, we've been getting people saying, "Oh, I'd like to see the MAU numbers going up faster," or like, "How's your retention looking?" and these kinds of things. So we've started to lean into that. What got Rich excited was statistics on user-generated content, the percentage of our users who were making content, the amount of content they were making, the regularity with which they were making it. And he could see the graphs of that going up very quickly. And his thesis was, well, if you've created a platform where people engage and they create content for each other to engage each other more, and I can see this trend starting, and it's at the foothills of it, and I can't see any reason why this is going to hit a ceiling anytime soon. Therefore, this looks like a trend I can get behind. This is something exciting and that can create something at mass scale.
Yeah.
And I should say, Rich's best ever investment was where he invested in Zynga, the Facebook game platform, as it then was, but now just the gaming company. And he did that off the basis of a 10-minute phone call with Mark Pincus, where, as Rich recounts it, basically Mark said, "Facebook's big, games are big, games on Facebook is going to be big. Do you like it?" And Rich was like, "Yeah, I'm in." And it is that kind of level of broad brush simplicity that he was looking for.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump into a question around kind of North Star metrics, because during this program, we ask all the founders to report on their growth every week. And one of the things that they need to do is identify a metric or a few metrics that are important to them. And then you've obviously just mentioned that you were focused on like user metrics, but actually there might be a different metric which investors are interested in. So we ask all investors that come in, and we have an investor every week, what metrics are important to them and what great looks like to them. So I guess from your side, because you sit on both sides of the table, what were you measuring? What would your North Star metrics have been when you're at pre-seed and seed? And then on the investor side of the table, when founders are pitching you, what metrics are you looking for them to be demonstrating?
Great question. So what we were doing, actually running up to Series A, we were totally focused on MAU, which was a mistake. It was a vanity metric, and it didn't cause us to do the right things. We then, with that conversation with Rich, we switched to how we could provide real value to users, which at the time was through giving them tools to create their own lists of words that they wanted to learn. And then, sorry, MAU is monthly active users. So then we focused on the percentage and number of users creating content and just how to optimize to that. And that's actually a much better North Star metric because it is focused around the value you're delivering rather than just a vanity of more people. Right now at Memrise, we have switched again to time spent in learning activities. And so there it is, this because of, again, a shift in our pedagogy or the way that we give value to users right now. Maybe I need to explain a little bit. Our approach to language learning is that language learning is actually about 20% about learning stuff and 80% about practicing stuff. And what caused me problems at school was that all my lessons were about the learning stuff. And then when I went to France, I hadn't done any practice. So it's kind of like being taught to swim in a classroom and then thrown into a lake and you can't swim. And so what we're trying to do with Memrise is give people enough time practicing, because there's literally no shortcut. Your brain just has to spend time trying to understand language in order to get good at understanding language. So our North Star metric is amount of time spent in practice activities. So everything now is how do we funnel more people into that? So that's how we think about it and what we're tracking. But the key is to find what is the value you are delivering and what is the argument you're making. So in our case, the argument we were making to the VC in the end was the value that we're creating is in a network through users creating content. Here is our North Star metric that shows how we're getting better at that. And this is how it's growing over time. And that was enough we were lucky in that we had been kind of doing that, even though it wasn't our North Star metric, so that when we rearranged that data and we're like, shit, this is the story we want to tell, we could back it up straight away and just come back the next day with a pitch that said it. So that's what we did. When I'm sitting on the investor side of the table and looking at it, it really is, again, about outside a very narrow range of direct to consumer, B2C mobile app with a game outlook, where I know what the metrics should look like. I know what your day one retention should look like. I know what your day 30 should look like. Outside that, I don't have benchmarks that I would be looking at. But what I want to understand is the argument that you're making and the evidence that you are presenting for that argument. So as an example, I think what you're doing as an early stage founder, what you're really doing is trying to, first of all, discover your unique insight, your vision of the world about how the future is going to look. And it normally comes from having a deeper understanding of what the future is going to look like. A wave of change that's coming that you can take advantage of. So the trend that you can both catalyze and benefit from. And then crucially, how you're plugging in right now to a first market that's then going to become dramatically larger because of the change that you see coming. So that's the kind of activity that you're doing as an early stage founder, is just understanding what is this wave of change that's coming. How do I understand today's market that can benefit from that and link up to that? So the pitch that you want to be making and the data that I want to be seeing is, how can you prove to me that you are right about your initial market and you're right about this wave of change that is coming? And there can be hugely different data that can verify that story depending on what your story is. But I just want to see that there's enough data there that I'm pretty sure you're right. And then I just have to believe in the vision of the future that you're painting. And if I believe in that, then I can see, I think you're right about the future. And you've shown that you're right about what you're doing already. So this story is going to pan out. So just as some examples of that, one company I'm working with at the moment is making software for battery recycling companies. Their vision of the future is battery recycling is about to get way, way bigger, because as soon as electric vehicles start to be recycled, there's suddenly going to be a ton more supply. None of the current battery recyclers have got process software that can deal with that on that level. So I'm like, it sounds sensible, sounds like something that's needed in the future, but can you sell it today? Can you sell it to anyone today? So then they've got, for them, if they show me they got five existing battery recyclers who are like, yeah, this software already makes our lives easier and gives us an ROI, then I can join those dots up and say, well, you've got 5 really happy customers. That's going to grow dramatically as this whole industry grows. So that makes sense. So it's a very different metric to what we'd have for Memrise, but it's all about like proving out the thesis that is the core of your pitch deck, basically.
Yeah. Do you want to see revenue, or are you not necessarily worried about revenue if someone can articulate like the argument that they're making and they've got the stats to back it up outside of revenue?
So I think revenue is one good way of showing that you're delivering value to you customers, but it's not the only one. So I certainly wouldn't get over distracted by thinking you can only do revenue. Certainly the advice we were getting for Memrise was that we had to charge revenue. And that's why we went to America, because people didn't have that view at that time. And people believed or understood the argument for building a network effect, which we couldn't get VCs in the UK to buy into at the time. So I think as long as you're creating value, it doesn't have to be revenue. That said, routes to creating value that have revenue early are much lower risk. So they can be way more attractive.
Yeah. So, and I think at the moment, what everyone's hearing from VCs is that revenue is way more important in the current economic climate than just customer acquisition. So having people proving that people will spend money on your product is a really
right. Although I'd also say just customer acquisition is very unlikely to be convincing to me. Whereas if you can show real evidence of a network being built up, that's something that can be like, okay, that could be valuable.
Yeah. Just whilst we're talking about revenue, and before we go into the question, so the one thing that SaaS founders seem to really struggle with when we talk to them is figuring out the price point. And you mentioned that you were operating on a freemium model, and we're trying to get that initial acquisition and network effect. But how did you approach pricing when you did price?
Yeah, so I mean, B2C is going to be a very different thing to B2B. I mean, to actually clarify previous things, I think B2B, you're almost always going to want to go for revenue first, because the network effects are just going to play out very differently. But B2C, it can be more common to build a network effect first. So the way we went about pricing is a very edifying story. So we started off, Memrise was free for a long time. When we moved to charging a toll, it was culturally very difficult for the team. They got so used to not charging, it was almost sacrilegious to think about charging people money, which was tricky. We then spent a long time talking to our users and asking them what they would pay for, and they said they'd pay for data about their learning and insights into how they learn, what kind of a learner they were, what time of day they learn best, all this kind of stuff. So we did that, and we put that on at we kind of benchmarked it against other consumer subscription apps and made it a bit cheaper, and literally no one bought it. I mean, I think outside my direct family, nobody bought it. And so then we're like, back to the drawing board. What can we pay for? What can we charge for? And we then started creating new features, new learning modes that people could pay for. And again, we quite unsubtly just benchmarked against what Babbel, Duolingo, the kind of pre-existing competitors were charging, and just put ourselves slightly under them, but basically at the same price point. So that was very unsubtle. We then localized per market because we're available in all countries. So we do a sort of Big Mac index localization. We've then done a lot of testing over the years and it's very hard on a mobile app doing price testing because you're across 3 platforms, all of which have different pricing systems and none of which allow you, well, web you could do just a straight A/B test, but Apple and Android just don't let you do a straight A/B test for pricing because they want to protect their consumers and not have them being charged different prices. So you have to do kind of before and after tests, which in my experience almost always lead to the conclusion that you can't be too sure whether you made it better or worse. So it's our pricing our pricing story has not been a very edifying one. It's really hard to get right on these, and I think we, as an industry, language learning has been trending up the amount that we charge, and so we tend to just keep pace with that because we can, and there's not very much to be gained by being outside it. Being the low cost producer supplier or the high cost supplier doesn't obviously lend any value.
Yeah, just for the founders here, we had Mark Gainey, one of the co-founders of Strava, come in during the last program and talk about how they messed up pricing at the beginning of this year. And they are a business that have been going for over a decade as well. So unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to work out, and your users will quickly make you aware if you've got users.
We've really ballsed up pricing about 5 years ago, where we were experimenting with shifting prices, and we tried raising prices across Android and iOS at the same time. And the product manager doing it accidentally raised prices for all existing users as well. So when it came to renewal, they then had to opt in for the higher price in order to renew. It probably cost us $1.5 million in lost renewals. It was just a total balls up.
Yeah.
Literally nothing you could do about it. It was like, ooh. Yeah.
So trying to figure out the kind of hacks, because I've obviously all of us are kind of customers of other SaaS products, and I've seen how other people have, like they try and renew you and then you don't renew, and all of a sudden you can get 3 months for only £10, and there's all these little things that they do after they've potentially lost you to try and claw you back. And having that relationship with a customer when you're running a subscription business means that you kind of have a bit more of an opportunity to win them back than if it was just a one-off purchase and you don't know anything about them. So I don't know if you've got any experience of like when it has gone wrong, things that you've done to rectify.
So for us, and this may be very specific to the kind of SaaS that a language learning product is, that when people cancel it, it's generally because they're not learning a language anymore. And so we've had very little success in saying, oh, you've cancelled, well, here's an extra discount, because they're like, I mean, however much you discount it, I've broken up with my German girlfriend. I am no longer learning German. And I'm just not going to do it. So that we have tried bits, but we haven't had a huge amount of success with. We do have a lot of success with running variable discounts. So testing on the headline price is very hard. It's also difficult to have different prices on different platforms, because if someone buys on iOS and it's more expensive than if they bought on Android, but they've got both, how do you manage that? You start getting complaints about it. So where we are at the moment is same price point across everything, but we manage discounts differently on the different platforms, because broadly iOS users are basically happy to pay a much higher price, and if you run a 50% discount on iOS, you're probably leaving money on the table. They probably would have converted at about the same rate with a 15% discount. Whereas on Android, we found the need to discount much more deeply, and that if you don't discount down to 50%, you just don't get the conversions at all. And by being able to test on discounts rather than test on the headline price, you can find these pivot points where it kind of you get a step change shift. It's when we've done the headline pricing experiments, it's always kind of amazed me the extent to which the elasticity is perfect. You know, we raise the price and the conversion rate falls to exactly net off, and we end up with the same amount of money, until you get to particular inflection points where suddenly it's cheap enough that people are asked on it, I'll just buy, or where you get expensive enough that it changes people's perception, and they're suddenly like, oh, this must be really good because it's so expensive, and you suddenly get these sort of switches happening. But it's for a large part of the graph, you get incredibly proportionate change. And having the percentage discounts is something that we found really, really helpful to being able to be more nuanced about it and find those kind of fulcrums.
Yeah. Did you mentioned that you've done quite a lot of pricing changes after you've got users or customers, and that you spoke to people about what they would pay for in the beginning, but did you ask them how much they would pay in the beginning? And if so, how did you approach that conversation? Was it like a bracket, or did you just ask them and they could come up with any
so
number?
I can tell you what we did. I can tell you what I would do now. And what we did was ask people, actually we didn't do it too badly. We did a bunch of surveys of people, asking them how much they would pay and giving them different brackets. I mean, I think it's pretty well established now that there are better ways of asking that question, of things like, you know, what would be expensive for this product, what would be cheap for this product, what would be a good price. So that we have done those questions in the more recent past, which has taken us to a place. It's pretty clear that Babbel, Duolingo, Boozoo have all done the same research from the same people, and we get to the same answers as them. So yes, we ask the question like that now, but ultimately it's got us, because in a way the language learning market is very commoditized. Unless you're selling something dramatically different, like a tutoring product, it's pretty hard to make the case that you should be charging very dramatically differently.
Before I move on to Q&A, because there's loads of questions coming in on the chat and people with their hands raised, and we can probably find this out on your website, but how much is the pricing at now?
So it is about $10 a year, $70. So $10 a month, $70 a year.
And there's like one package that you can get. You haven't got bronze, silver, gold, and all these different stuff.
Just one basic unlocks everything.
Yeah, cool. Great. I'm going to pass over to Em, who is going to manage the Q&A.
All right. First question I'll take from the chat, and then Michael, correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, we'll go to you after that. Okay, so first question will be from Adam. He said, I see many pitch decks. Do you always take feedback and change, or hold your nerve and go with your belief and thesis? I see a disproportionate number of tweaks and delays and founders with reduced focus due to quote unquote advice. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because also so much when you're pitching a VC, you've also got to be really aware that when you're pitching a junior person at the VC, their OKR is to talk to a ton of companies. And so they are satisfying their boss and their targets for promotion by just talking to you. And they might not have the least intention of taking it forward. They might have been told that they're not even deploying capital this quarter. They had to get as many meetings in the diary as possible. And when they give you advice, they're kind of just wriggling off the hook for the fact that they're not going to take this forward. And you've got to be really careful on taking that advice at face value. Just like talking to users, you don't take the advice at face value. You try and understand where it's coming from. and thinking, but it can be really, really helpful to have that that input as well. The most common thing that a pitch tells you, or feedback from a pitch tells you, is you haven't made them as excited as you want them to be. And it can just be as simple as that. Like they're not yet excited. And then you think, well, why am I not getting them excited? Okay, they're asking a question about this, about this. Is that really what they care about? Or is it that the main thing that they should be excited about, they're not getting? And what I see so often in pitch decks is that founders are so excited about so much of their business that they add in more stuff to the pitch deck. And then the VC or the investor homes in on one part, and the conversation ends up being about that one part, which isn't the part that the founder actually cares about. And so the way that I talk to people about that is that, like, you get to define where you're going to have the battle. You get to define where the debate will center. And if the debate is on something that is not what you wanted to center the debate on, then you don't even have to listen to them. It's like, shit, I failed. The conversation was not what I wanted the conversation to be about. If the conversation is what you want the conversation to be about, but they didn't agree with you, then you've got to look back and think, am I wrong about this really core thesis? Or are they wrong? And do they just not get it? And both are possible. But so I think those are the two kind of ways in which a deck can fail. One is the conversation was about the wrong thing, in which case you just got to focus your deck in again, take out anything, however much you love it, take it out if it's going to lead to a conversation which is not the conversation you want to have. And then if it is the conversation you want to have, you've got to judge, was that, did they bring something new, or are they just wrong and don't get it? Does that help?
Perfect. Okay, Mikael, we're going to go over to you, and then Annie will go through your question afterwards.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks so much, Ben. Very useful so far. Quick question to start with. When you mentioned that at the point when you introduced the pricing, nobody bought, how many subscribers you had at that time?
How many users, or how many?
Yes. How many users?
So registered users, we probably had a bit over 1 million, and I think we had about 150,000 monthly, about 200,000 monthly actives.
Okay, cool. Wow. I installed your app and to have a play with it. I've never heard about it before. And I saw that you have a lifetime access as well in the pricing.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of comments saying that it's a very dangerous approach and you should refrain from that. So I was wondering, how did it work for you? And, is it beneficial at all?
Yeah,
traction from that,
It works well. I mean, in a way, it's quite a simple, for a business like ours, where we're pretty confident in what our lifetime values are. If you set the price of the lifetime subscription at above your expected lifetime value from an annual plan, then you're just getting the money up front. It's not a terribly high risk strategy. It's just bringing forward the point at which you get that revenue. So for that reason, I don't think it's particularly high risk. I guess you might say I can imagine there are products where it's costly for you to provide the service, where you might want to continue matching, at least on an annual basis, delivery of the service to the revenue from that. But for us, that's not really, it's so low cost to keep the servers running. So that's not a huge concern.
Okay. If I may, I have two more quick questions.
Okay, go for one more quick question, because we have a lot of others.
I'm curious to, basically, maybe I'll start with this one. I've recently attended a pitch from investors, actually pitching to startups, and I spoke to a number of them saying that they invest at the early stage, pre-seed stage businesses. At the moment, we have MVP, no revenue yet. And as soon as I started talking to them, I thought it's a good match. I was told, do you have any revenue? I said no, and they don't want to talk. So does that mean I should move with our, fundraising to states, because the moods seem to be very similar as the one you described 10 years ago?
So it could mean that, or it could mean they're right. So it could, without knowing more about the business, I think it's also true that everywhere right now is people are going to be focused more on revenue as an early stage indicator. There can still be businesses where you don't need it, but I think it's a strong one. Also, generally, investors are going to invest where they can see you're already making progress and their money helps you go faster, rather than where giving you money lets you make the progress. It's kind of, they want to see that you're going to get it done anyway. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference of whether they're in or out. And it's an opportunity for them to be in. That's where you'll start getting them excited. And so I think it can be very powerful to get, in whatever form, revenue is a very strong early signal. And I think it probably is true that the big network effect businesses, I mean, when we were raising back then, 10 years ago, it was still quite a new idea to build network effects and raise money on that. And it was quite a hot area for VCs. I don't think it has that, if VCs in America, I don't think it has that allure right now. So it may be more of a struggle.
All right, we're going to move on to Annie.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm the founder and CEO of One Way X. We provide a 3D immersive interactive shopping experience for online brands, very similar to Shopify of the world, but we help small to medium-sized brands to get into the metaverse. Just because of our topic today on pricing, our business model is specifically targeted for small to medium size brands, but today I had a call with a big corporate luxury brand umbrella that have about 16 brands under their umbrella, and they're very interested to do a pilot. Now, I'm just wondering and wanting to get an understanding from your experience on pricing, especially on a B2B SaaS-based model, is how do you figure out your pricing? And if an opportunity like that comes, how do you figure out a pricing? Because you don't want to be selling too cheap. That way you are lowering our company and brand value. So any thoughts around that, and any,
Yeah. So I guess there are a bunch of different ways you could look at this. So if we think about it, going back to the investor pitch angle, so I assume you're also going to be raising a round soon.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So if you think like, what is the thesis that I'm trying to tell? What's the story that I'm trying to tell? And what price would prove that out? Because if you've got this data point of, we've got this deal with this company at this price, that's now going to be plugged into your financial model and be like, this is how this is going to scale out and achieve great financial results. So if you put that number too low, then it risks being actively unhelpful to your thesis, because you're like, oh yeah, no, the one that we've sold was cheaper, but we're going to sell at a higher price. And they're like, well, you've got one data point and it tells me a different story to the one that you're telling in your financial model. So what's going on there? But at the same time, you want to make sure that it works for the customer. So I would probably start by mapping it that way around and just thinking, what is the number that I need this to be in order to be able to tell a convincing story? or tell the story that I want to tell. And then that gives you a way of saying, well, that's my ground level. And then I can go in a bit above that, but I know that that's where I have to close this deal. If it goes below that, it may be actively unhelpful to have the deal.
At an
Alright.
early stage, would you do a free pilot?
So again, depends what thesis I'm trying to prove, and it depends on the risk of the product. So a free pilot could certainly make sense. In your case, it could say, we did a free pilot in order to then convert that to a paid pilot. And you could say then, we did this free pilot, we proved out these parts, and then we got the paid one. It may be that you need to do the free pilot in order to get the paid one. But if you can go straight to a paid one, that's the shortest route. But yeah, take the shortest route. If you can do it without a free pilot, do it without. If you need a free pilot, get a free pilot.
Amazing. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to try to do 2 quick questions in the chat, and then the last question will probably beat you, and depending on our timing. Okay, so really good question from Will. Would you also consider daily active users a vanity metric, or is it a sign of an engaged audience that's taking value from your tool?
I think it's on the vanity metric end of things. I think you can likely come up with a better measure of value. Daily active users, you get a TikTok post goes viral and suddenly you've got loads of daily active users, but doesn't mean that they've actually got anything from you. So I would, I think it's at the vanity end.
Okay.
I think it's unlikely to be the best metric of value that you can find.
Great. And then from Tim, he said, do you get a good hit rate on a long-term annual contract with a discount over a higher price, no contract, monthly contract? So better hit rate from annual contracts with a discount, or month to month, no contract?
We get a better, by hit rate, do you mean kind of lifetime value or conversion rate?
Tim, if you want to add any context in the chat, go for it. If not, we'll assume lifetime value.
Yeah, it's what I was trying to work out was at the original point of sale, do you convert more people to annuals because you discount them appropriately, or do more people start with a month to month?
So if there's no other discount going, the annual campaign is more popular. It's about 60%. But if we then run discount campaigns on the annuals, so overall we're about 85% annuals. It's okay. Overwhelming, the annuals.
What's the percentage difference off the top of your head in terms of, so if you're £10
so the annual is about 7 times the monthly.
Right.
Okay, and then for the last question, we have got about 2 minutes left. Ewan, go for it.
Hey, I actually used your platform a couple of years ago to learn French and Russian. I'm using it now to learn Mandarin, which is a bit of a hill to climb. You mentioned how when you was a teenager, you was doing neuroscience. Similarly, I kind of went deep into nuclear engineering and learned how to make a portable nuclear reactor to go from like A to B, which was a really fun few years. And when you went to China, you must have been like mid-20s, early 20s, like a young founder. And I just wondered, did you change your messaging to kind of talk about your early days and where that came from? Because I've had issues with, well, you're the wrong team because you've had experience, but really it's like 14 years old doing this stuff. But in the pitch text, just wondered if part of your change in pitching was talking about your early days and if that kind of helped or anything like that.
Yeah, the narrativizing of one's life, which obviously is just chaos in the experience. And then you have to pick out the right kind of threads as it goes on. Yeah, it definitely it is an important part of the fundraising journey. It's a really annoying part of it as well, because you're sort of fenced in by what you've done before, but kind of obviously you're also doing something new. And So, I mean, yes, this is a real thing that you need to work on, and working out how to make it really personal to you. And I think it is a really important part of pitching, is to make it personal, tell people about why you are interested in this. In a way, you want to think about how are they going to tell their mates about this, their husband about this afterwards. And it tends to be people talk about it like, oh yeah, there was this guy who went to, this neuroscientist who went to China to teach himself Chinese, and then he built this platform. It's like an easy story for someone to tell about why it's great. Whereas talking about the details of our pedagogic approach and why we think language learning is actually about practice, not about learning, it's pretty niche, geeky stuff, and no one really cares. And so finding that way to tell it, to make it a personal story, I would take the feedback. If people are saying, you're not the right person to do this, why are you doing that? I would take that feedback to say, I haven't controlled this narrative well enough. I need to control this narrative better. So I want however you tell the story, it needs to be that they're like, oh yeah, obviously this guy would be building this business. Of course he would.
I'm just going to jump in with one final question, which hopefully should inspire anyone here who hasn't yet made their first actual sale yet to a paying customer. Do you remember your first sale that was to someone outside of like a best friend or family, and how you got it?
So we opened up to a beta group of testers who were about 1,000 people, and I knew them all through the forums and through discussion with them, and they all converted pretty damn fast. And that was really exciting. When we moved, they didn't convert for the first product, but when we moved to the selling them features, they converted really, really fast, and that was exciting. I didn't know any of them personally, but they I had been on chats with many of them, and that was just a moment of literally switching it on and then just watching the sales come through, and was super exciting. It was like, whoa, if we scale up, we do the same growth in the next 24 hours, we'll get to there. And then, obviously.
Yeah, so kind of having that community around you before you actually switch on pricing can be beneficial in that sense.
Yeah, we did a lot of community building, and it was really making sure. I mean, my job for the first 3 years was community manager. That was what I did every day, and it was just building that. Just building the community.
100%. Thank you so much, Ben, for all of those insights as an investor and as a founder. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can just, LinkedIn is great. Yeah, just connect on LinkedIn. That works pretty well.
Cool. So we'll send everybody over Ben's LinkedIn. We send a follow-up email and the session recording as well, and any kind of top tips and takeaways from Ben. Ben, thank you so much. We will let you go.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
And founders, usually will stick around afterwards to answer any questions. However, this time we do have a call right afterwards we have to hop to. You'll be getting an email from us with more details very shortly. So keep your eyes open for that. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you know where to find us, and be sure to join the WhatsApp group once we send out the link this afternoon. Okay, thanks everyone.